Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. And in this video, I am making a modification slash fix on my Peavey MiniMega bass amplifier head. Now I'll get right into the fix, and most people probably haven't even noticed it, but me, I like to go and be very gear-oriented technical, and I noticed it, and thankfully it was a pretty straightforward fix. The issue here is that if I'm using the DI out and I have it set to post EQ, the difference being, so pre-EQ means it's going to be right at the input of your bass amplifier, any pedals that's going right in front of it, that's this signal that's going to come out of the XLR. Most of the sound guys are going to want that, just for many reasons, but it's a lot less work for them to have to go and EQ your bass signal going to the front of the house mixer, because if you were to go and set it to post, now you're going to take that EQ signal that you've already made that's really meant for your bass cab at the end of your signal chain is now going to go through that XLR. The front of the house guy is going to have a little bit more work to do, basically, to get it to sound correctly, and most of those guys don't want to post EQ signal. But the trick with that is that if you have any effects down the chain, and usually it's in your effects loop, for example, could be flanger, chorus, phaser, delay, reverb, things like that, even a pitch shifter. So this is how I actually figured out the problem. I have a Digitech bass whammy here, and I usually use it to, do some harmony and do some cool sound effects, but I also use the detune function. And what I noticed was that when I set this to post EQ, I would expect that it would include this effects loop where the whammy would go, and it was not sending this signal post EQ DI out of this direct interface setup here. That was a problem, because if I am pitch shifting my bass with the effects loop, with the whammy and the effects loop, and it's not going to the PA system, if my amplifier setup is, say, tuned to half a step or a full step down, the DI was actually sending my 440 tuned bass signal over to the front of the house, as I mentioned, and it didn't sound right. It actually sounded quite awful. Had to stop the song, had to rearrange my setup once I figured out what was happening, and I took the whammy out of the effects loop and put it to the front of the amp so that the DI can hear the properly detuned signal for those particular songs that I was doing. Now what you're seeing is the modification that I did. I did have to take this entire board out, which you have to take all these pieces off. And for those technicians that are interested, this is not a terribly hard thing to do. There's plenty of ribbon cable and wire loom here to where you can actually lift this out of the amplifier pretty easily. What you have to do is you do have to go and desolder the switch here, which is the pre and post switch, and you need to make a modification to it. And I have an aftermarket switch here to give you an idea of what is happening. So what we have here is that one pin you got to bend out and not insert it into the circuit board, because the circuit board is double-sided, so there's a trace right in the middle of it that connects to the post EQ, but before the effects loop. What I did was I then used a 100 ohm resistor, and then using a red wire here so you can follow it, follows that ribbon cable back to the front of the amplifier here, and we'll head over to C13. Now C13, this is going to be a little difficult to see, but here on the schematic, if you can see, I connected it to C13 right after the muting transistors so that it allows you, for the foot switch at least, the foot switch does allow you to control the effects loop on and off. And I pulled that signal for the post EQ right there. So if I wanted to turn off the effects loop for whatever reason on my foot switch, it would also reflect that signal back to the XLR going to your front of the house. And that is how it is supposed to be. I did talk to John Fields. He is fixing the schematic for the MiniMega moving forward. This amplifier is actually still made today, March 4th, 2025. This is still in production today, even though its successor, the Trace Elliot TE1200, it's under that brand name. They own the Trace Elliot brand, but Peavey still makes this amplifier head, and it's been around since 2014. Now, I will say that this is probably the most minor issue that no one is ever going to notice except maybe myself, because No one has said anything about this, as far as I can research, about this issue since this amplifier came out on the market. I think there's a good reason for that, because most bass players, they don't know what an effects loop is. This flat out honest. I don't think most of those guys that are playing bass are not using an effects loop, because if they are using effects at all, they're going to run it straight to the input of the amplifier, and that's it. They have their pedal board on the ground, which is all, in this monstrosity mess here. They're going to run it to the front of the amp, and then the DI is going to pick up that signal anyway, and you're going to control your effects that way. Great. And this is a non-issue, and this whole video is a waste of time. But I, for one, like using the 4-cable method, where you have effects going into the front of the amp, and then you have effects after the EQ to shape your signal a little bit further before it goes out to your speaker cab or your DI to the front of the house. The 4-cable method, how many bass players are actually doing that on a daily basis? Probably not as much as you might think, is my thought on that. I think for future prosperity, if anyone is running into this issue, this video should serve as a way to get it figured out. And if you want to make the modification, please let me know. Thank you so much for watching, supporting my channel. Thanks to Peavey for correcting the error, and I'll see you guys on the next project.